Everyone knows how Atari died. They made the worst video game in history, a rushed disaster based on a hit movie, and it flopped so badly that the company loaded millions of unsold copies into trucks, drove them out into the New Mexico desert, and buried them in the sand. That burial actually happened. The story about why is wrong, because one bad game does not kill the fastest growing company in America. And in 1982, that is exactly what Atari was. $2 billion in sales, 10,000 employees. At its peak, it earned the majority of the profit for its giant parent company, Warner. A single bad cartridge does not topple something that big. Something else did. So what really buried Atari? It wasn't a game, it wasn't a competitor. Not yet. It was one decision made years earlier that quietly rotted the whole empire from the inside out. And here's the proof. 2 years after Atari collapsed, a second company walked into the exact same graveyard, did the one thing Atari had refused to do, and built the biggest name in gaming on top of the bones. This is the rise and fall of Atari. To understand what really killed Atari, you have to go back to a bar and a quarter. 1972. An engineer named Nolan Bushnell releases a game so simple you can explain it in one sentence. 2 paddles and a bouncing dot. He calls it Pong. And people lose their minds. Bars put the machines in the corner, and within days they jam. Not break, jam. Because they are physically stuffed too full of quarters. Bushnell had stumbled onto something nobody fully understood yet. People would pay, again and again, just to play. But the real masterstroke came in 1977, with a home console called the Atari 2600. And here was the genius of it. The machine itself barely mattered. What mattered was that it played interchangeable cartridges, little plastic slabs, each one a different game. You didn't buy a game. You bought a machine that could play any game, forever. Sell the console cheap and sell the cartridges for the next 10 years. And print money it did. Back in 1976, Bushnell had sold Atari to the media giant Warner Communications for $28 million. 6 years later, that looked like the deal of the century. By 1982, Atari was a $2 billion company with 10,000 employees. The beating heart of Warner's entire empire. But hidden inside that beautiful machine was a flaw that nobody noticed. Atari had built the platform the whole world played on, and it had forgotten to lock the door. That unlocked door is where the real story begins. In 1979, 4 of Atari's best programmers walked into their boss's office with a complaint. They were building games that sold millions of copies, and they were being treated like factory hands. No credit, no royalties, not even their names on the box. Management reportedly told them they mattered no more than the workers bolting the consoles together. So they quit, and they started their own company, making games for Atari's machine. Without Atari's permission, they called it Activision. Atari was furious. It sued, but it couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. The fight ended in a settlement that only confirmed the obvious. Atari could not stop other people from making cartridges for its own console. And once that door was open, everyone came pouring through. Think about what that meant. Atari had built the machine sitting in everyone's living room, but it had zero control over what went into it. Suddenly, dozens of companies were flooding stores with cartridges, and most of them were garbage. Cheap, broken, shoveled out to cash in on the craze. There was no gate, no seal of approval, nothing standing between a customer and the junk. And a kid who blew his allowance on 3 terrible games in a row learned a hard lesson. He stopped trusting the box at all. But Atari didn't see the danger. It saw only the boom. In 1982, it released a home version of the arcade Smash Pac-Man. The port was frankly bad, and it sold over 7 million copies anyway. 7 million. To Atari's leaders, that proved something intoxicating. It proved they could sell absolutely anything. So when they landed the rights to that summer's biggest movie, the one about a lost little alien, they didn't blink. They handed it to one programmer, a genuinely talented young man named Howard Scott Warshaw, gave him about 5 weeks to build a whole game from nothing, and then ordered around 4 million cartridges before a single copy had been tested. The game came out, and it sold about 1.5 million copies. For almost any other title, that would have been a hit. But Atari hadn't made 1.5 million. It had made 4 million. So the story wasn't the sales, it was the returns. Truckloads of unsold cartridges came flooding back into warehouses that were already full. And here is the part everyone gets wrong. E.T. did not kill Atari. E.T. was just the most famous symptom of a disease that was already everywhere. Because it wasn't only that one game gathering dust. It was everyone's games. The shelves had become a graveyard of cartridges nobody wanted. Ataris. And all the knockoffs from all the imitators. The whole industry had manufactured far more than the world could ever buy. And on one specific day, Wall Street finally saw it. December 7th, 1982. Warner made a quiet little announcement. For months, they'd promised investors that Atari would grow 50% that year. Now, they admitted the real number would be closer to 15. That was all it took. In a single day, Warner's stock dropped about 35%, and very roughly $1 billion in value simply evaporated. One announcement, one afternoon, the dream of infinite growth, the belief that you could stamp out cartridges forever and the world would keep on buying, died right there, in a single trading session. And what came next was not a slump, it was an extinction. In 1983, Americans spent about $3.2 billion on home video games. 2 years later, in 1985, they spent around 100 million. That is not a dip. That is a 97% collapse. An entire industry almost wiped off the map in 24 months. Stores that had built whole departments around video games ripped them out and swore they would never stock another one. Everybody agreed the fad was finished for good. And Atari, the giant at the very center of it, went into freefall. Its workforce cratered from around 10,000 people down to 2,000. 8 of every 10 jobs gone. Which brings us, at last, back to the desert. Late in 1983, in the town of Alamogordo, New Mexico, Atari quietly sent a convoy of trucks to the local landfill. They dumped their unsellable inventory straight into the ground. The E.T. cartridges, yes, but consoles and dozens of other titles too. And then they crushed it and sealed it under a layer of concrete. For 30 years, people swore the whole thing was a myth, a story too perfect to be true. Until 2014, when a film crew got permission to dig and pulled 1,382 cartridges back out of the sand. The legend was real, a tombstone in the desert for the industry Atari had drowned. By the summer of 1984, Warner had seen enough. It sold off Atari's console business to a man named Jack Tramiel for $240 million. And not even in cash, but in IOS. The most valuable thing Warner had owned 2 years earlier was now something you paid a stranger to take away. So let's go back to the start and to that terrible little game. Was it really E.T.'s fault? Here's what almost nobody tells you about the man who built it. Howard Scott Warshaw was not a hack. Just 1 year earlier, he had designed a game called Yar's Revenge, one of the most loved, best-selling original titles the Atari ever had. The very person history blames for killing gaming had, months before, made one of its small masterpieces. He wasn't the disease. He was handed 5 weeks and an impossible deadline, and then handed the blame for an entire industry. He was a fall guy. Because E.T. didn't kill Atari. Atari killed Atari. It built a gold mine that the whole world wanted to dig in. And then it refused to put a gate on the entrance. It let anyone pour anything into its machine, buried its own customers in junk, and manufactured for a fantasy that was never coming. The problem was never one bad game. The problem was a company that had no way and no will to say no. And you don't have to take my word for it, because the ending proves it. In 1985, with every retailer in America swearing that video games were dead and buried, a Japanese company shipped a brand new console into that exact wasteland. It was called the Nintendo Entertainment System. And Nintendo had studied Atari's corpse very carefully. So they did the one thing Atari never did. They locked the door. Every machine they sold carried a chip inside it that checked each cartridge and refused to run anything the company had not personally approved. Every official game earned a golden seal on the box. A quiet promise to that burned, distrustful kid that this one, at least, was worth his money. Nintendo controlled exactly what went onto its platform, and on the very graveyard that had killed Atari, it built an empire that still rules gaming today. That's the whole lesson, sitting right there in the sand. It is not enough to build a thing that everybody uses. If you don't control what goes onto it, you don't really own it. You're just the one left holding the bag when it fills up with garbage. Atari didn't end up buried in that desert because of one bad game about an alien. It got buried because it handed the world the keys and never once built a lock. If you like stories about giants who built an empire and then gave away the one thing holding it together, subscribe. Trust me, there are plenty more. And tell me in the comments, whose rise and fall should we tell next?